The chill of December didn't stand a chance against the warmth buzzing through me as I waited at the airport on December 15, 2023. For years felt like a lifetime, but today, she was coming home. My girlfriend, the one who jetted off to study abroad, leaving a gaping hole in my daily life, was finally returning, even if just for the holidays. I couldn't help but bounce on my heels, a goofy grin plastered on my face, ignoring the curious glances from other bystanders. When she finally emerged, slightly tipsy from the flight's indulgences, our eyes locked, and it was like we were the only two people in the world. The drive home was surreal. She was here, in my car, her laughter filling the space between us, cutting through the years of distance. She queued up a playlist of our songs, and somewhere between the airport and our apartment, in a moment charged with reunion's raw energy, we reconnected in a way we hadn't in years. It was spontaneous, a bit reckless, but it felt like reclaiming a part of us lost in time. Walking into our apartment, I caught her glancing at her phone more often than I remembered. There was a slight shift, a sort of secrecy in the way she'd angled the screen away from me. But hey, after years of long distance, trust was our foundation. I shrugged it off, attributing it to her needing to catch up on messages from friends or perhaps jet-lagged, making her crave some personal space. The next day, we ventured out for brunch at our favorite spot, the one where we had our first date. It felt normal, comfortable, and right. We talked, laughed, and shared glances that said, "I've missed this." The physical connection was undeniable, a reminder of the chemistry that had first drawn us together. It felt like we were picking up right where we left off, no distance or time could dampen what we had. Yet, as days passed, her phone became a constant companion during our moments together. Movie nights ended with her on one end of the couch, me on the other, and her attention firmly locked on her screen. I noticed, sure, but never brought it up. Why stir trouble when everything else felt so right? December 22nd rolled around too quickly, and she was packing up to spend Christmas with her family abroad. She promised we'd stay in touch, FaceTime every day, and share in the holiday spirit, despite the miles. It sounded perfect, but the reality was different. Getting her on a call became a Herculean task, each attempt met with excuses about family outings or bad Wi-Fi. Concern crept in, whispering doubts I was quick to silence. We did manage to connect on Christmas Day, though, and for a while, it was like nothing had changed. We laughed, reminisced, and made plans for the future. Plans filled with hope and shared dreams. But as the call ended, and I was left in the silence of my apartment, the joy of the moment faded, leaving me with an unease I couldn't quite shake off. Was I just being paranoid, or was the distance between us more than just physical now? The trust that had once been unshakable now seemed to have developed hairline cracks, invisible but ever present. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if the distance had changed us more than I'd realized, or if, maybe, I was just afraid of what the future held for us. The air was frosty when she returned on December 27th, but the chill inside wasn't from the weather. It was her, distant like she'd brought back a piece of the foreign winter in her heart. She was glued to her phone, her fingers swiping with purpose, her eyes rarely meeting mine. Even as I tried to close the gap between us on the couch, she'd subtly shift away, her phone always in hand. It was like she was physically there, but miles away in spirit. Then came December 30th, a day that started like any other but ended with my world turned upside down. "We need to talk," she said, the weight of those words hanging heavy between us. She talked about feeling neglected, about mistrust that seemed to come out of nowhere. I was blindsided, scrambling to find words, to understand where all this was coming from. "I just think it's best if we end things," she concluded, her voice steady, her decision seemingly final. Desperation kicked in. "We can work through this," I pleaded, my mind racing to offer solutions, changes, anything. "I can be better, more attentive, whatever you need." But her resolve was a fortress, my words, mere whispers against its walls. She had made up her mind, leaving me grappling with a reality I wasn't ready to accept. However, a sliver of hope emerged when we decided to give it another go on our city break planned for January 2nd. It was like a ceasefire, a brief respite from the turmoil. Those days were a mix of the familiar and the tentative, moments of intimacy intertwining with bursts of laughter. It felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded, exhilarating yet terrifying, not knowing if the next step would bring us closer or set everything ablaze again. By January 6th, as I drove her to the airport, the goodbye was filled with promises of effort and making it work. Yet, the unease lingered, a silent passenger on the ride back home. Her words said one thing, but the hesitation in her voice, the fleeting looks, told a different story. It was like watching a replay of our happiest moments, only this time, the colors were muted, the sounds a little off. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts a jumbled mess. The silence of the apartment was a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I replayed our conversations, searching for signs, for reasons why things felt so off. Was it me? Was it her? Was it the distance that had wedged itself between us, not just physically but emotionally? In that solitude, the realization hit hard. We were two people holding on to the ghost of what we used to be, scared to let go, yet hurting from holding on too tight. The promise to make it work was like a band-aid on a wound that needed stitches, temporary relief doomed to give way. I sank into the couch, her absence more palpable than ever. The room was filled with memories, with echoes of laughter and whispers of love, now overshadowed by the weight of unsaid words and unresolved feelings. The journey ahead was uncertain, a path shrouded in fog, with the only guarantee being that it wouldn't be easy. But as the night crept in, one thing was clear. This was a chapter of our lives closing, with the next page still unwritten, and the pen heavy in my hands. It was January 9th when my world got flipped, yet again. "I think I've settled for less," she said, her words slicing through the air like a cold breeze. "I need space," she added, as if the miles and oceans between us during her studies weren't space enough. There I was, tossed into the limbo of hopeful waiting, clinging to the thin thread of maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. Days turned into nights filled with restlessness. My mind, a relentless detective, couldn't shake off the gnawing suspicion. So, I turned to technology for answers. Find My iPhone became my ally. And there it was, her location pinging from the same friend's house over and over. Space? More like specific coordinates to where our relationship's trust was being questioned. I confronted her, my voice laced with a mix of hope and dread. "So, this friend's place. You're there a lot, huh?" Her response was quick, too rehearsed. "Yeah, just hanging out, you know? It's nothing." But the seed of doubt was planted, watered by her evasion and nurtured by her half-hearted reassurances. The pressure built in a volcano on the brink. I needed clarity, a solid ground to stand on. "We can't keep doing this dance," I told her. "You need to decide what you want." It was a plea, a last-ditch effort to salvage the love I thought we had. But her resolve was ironclad, her words final. "I just need to be alone," she said, and with that, she cut me off from Find My iPhone, severing the last thread of our digital connection. Then, out of the blue, she shared her Uber location with me. The destination? The same house. A cruel twist of fate or a slip-up, it didn't matter. It was a breadcrumb trail leading to the truth I wasn't sure I wanted to find. I confronted her again, my frustration boiling over. "You keep ending up at this place. You're telling me there's nothing going on?" Her denial came as swiftly as before, a well-rehearsed script, devoid of guilt. "I've told you, it's not like that," she insisted, but the conviction was missing, her words hollow. The realization hit me like a freight train. The person I loved, trusted, and waited for was now a stranger, her actions and words weaving a web of deceit I could no longer ignore. The fabric of our relationship, once woven with threads of love and trust, was now frayed, torn by lies and secrets. As I sat alone, the silence of the room amplifying the chaos in my mind, I understood that this was more than just about her needing space or finding herself. It was about respect, honesty, and the painful truth that sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the gap between two hearts drifting apart. The chapter of us, once vibrant and full of promise, was closing, leaving behind a trail of what-ifs and memories fading into the backdrop of a love story that lost its way. The moment we blocked each other on all social media, it felt like plunging into an ice-cold ocean, the shock of it leaving me gasping for air. There I was, floating in a vortex of anxiety, doubt, and the kind of betrayal that eats at you from the inside out. The silence from her end was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in my mind. It was in one of those long, sleepless nights that I stumbled upon something that turned my world upside down. Spotify, of all things, became the unexpected witness to her infidelity. Their playlists, a digital tapestry of songs, each one a thread in the story of her betrayal. It was like discovering a secret language, one that spelled out my worst fears in melodies and lyrics. Driven by a cocktail of hurt and desperation, I dialed her number, my heart pounding against my chest. The phone rang, each tone a step deeper into the abyss. Then, a click. Hello? Her voice, once my comfort, now a sharp reminder of our fractured reality. Is it true? I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, heavy and loaded, before she hung up, a brief but definitive confirmation of my suspicions. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from her, apologizing for being rude, as if manners were the crux of our problems. I couldn't hold back. Tell me the truth, I texted back, my fingers trembling over the screen. And she did. There's someone else, she admitted, her words like a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. She spoke of love for this new man, citing the attention he lavished on her, attention I supposedly failed to provide. I sat there, phone in hand, a numbness spreading through me. The depth of her deceit was breathtaking. All those times she'd asked for presents, for tokens of my affection, she'd been nurturing another relationship behind my back. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the calculated manipulation of my feelings, keeping me as a safety net while she explored new possibilities. The realization was a crushing blow. I'd been a pawn in her game, my love and commitment exploited for her selfish needs. The weight of this truth was suffocating, pressing down on me until I felt I could no longer breathe. I was left to grapple with the shattered pieces of what I thought was a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. As I reflected on her actions, the scale of her betrayal unfolded before me. It wasn't an impulsive mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a series of calculated decisions made at the expense of my trust and emotional well-being. The person I had loved and trusted for years had become a stranger, her actions alien and cruel. In the aftermath, I found myself spiraling, each day a battle against the tide of emotions threatening to pull me under. The pain of her betrayal, the humiliation of being deceived, and the realization of my own naivety converged into a storm of despair. But amidst the wreckage, a painful clarity began to emerge. I understood that this wasn't just about her infidelity or the end of our relationship, it was a harsh lesson in self-respect and the importance of recognizing one's worth. The road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but it was a journey I had to undertake, not for her, but for myself. As I faced the daunting task of rebuilding my life, I knew that the scars of her deceit would always be a part of me. Yet, in that moment of profound loss, I also found a glimmer of hope. Hope that, with time, I could learn to trust again, to love again, and most importantly, to forgive, not for her sake, but for my own. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, life throws you a curveball that knocks you off your feet. That was me, the guy who thought he had the perfect relationship, until the day I stumbled upon the undeniable proof of her betrayal. It was like a gut punch, the kind that leaves you gasping for air, questioning every moment, every memory. The discovery was just the beginning, the catalyst for a descent I hadn't seen coming. I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, swinging wildly between wanting to fix what we had and burning everything to the ground in search of revenge. It was a toxic mix, one that began to eat away at the fabric of my daily life. Work became an afterthought, a place I showed up to but wasn't really present. Deadlines slipped by unnoticed, and projects that once ignited my passion felt like burdens. I was unraveling, thread by thread, and the worst part? I didn't even care. My family and friends, they noticed. How could they not? I was a shell of the man I used to be, hollowed out by anger and pain. They reached out, hands extended with words of comfort and offers of escape. But I pushed them away, too consumed by my own sense of betrayal to accept their help. I've got this, I'd say, a lie I told myself more than anyone else. As the days turned into weeks, I became a detective in my own twisted drama, piecing together the timeline of her infidelity. Social media, once a place of shared photos and happy memories, became my hunting ground. Every like, every comment, a potential clue. Mutual friends, once sources of joy, were now interrogated, their words sifted for hints of deceit. My obsession knew no bounds. I confronted him, the other man, in a showdown that was more about my shattered ego than seeking any real answers. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and for a moment, I teetered on the edge of violence, driven by a desire to reclaim some semblance of control. But this path, this need for vengeance, it led me down dark alleys I never intended to explore. Legal warnings soon followed, a stark reminder that my quest for justice was veering into dangerous territory. Privacy violations, they said, harassment claims, words that felt like handcuffs, restraining my every move. In a desperate bid for vindication, I turned to social media, airing our dirty laundry for the world to see. It was a mistake, a miscalculation driven by pain. Instead of rallying allies, I found myself more isolated, caught in the crossfire of divided loyalties. Friends I'd known for years chose sides, leaving me adrift in a sea of judgment and whispered conversations. Work, my once secure haven, became a battleground. My performance, hampered by sleepless nights and days spent in the grip of obsession, plummeted. Warnings turned into stern conversations, and eventually, the demotion came. It was a blow, not just to my career but to my identity, a confirmation of the failure I felt etched into every aspect of my life. I was lost, adrift in a storm of my own making, unable to see the shore. The man I once was, confident, driven, happy, seemed like a stranger, a distant memory overshadowed by the wreckage of the present. The pursuit of truth, of some semblance of justice, had cost me more than I ever imagined, leaving me to wonder if any of it was worth the price. In the thick of a storm you've whipped up yourself, there's a desperate kind of clarity that comes with knowing you've got nothing left to lose. That was me, gearing up for one last stand, a final showdown that I hoped would bring me some semblance of closure. I was gunning for remorse, maybe a sliver of guilt, or at the very least, an explanation that made sense of the chaos she'd left in her wake. We met in the very cafe where our story began, the irony of the setting not lost on me. There she was, the same, yet unrecognizably different, her indifference a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. As I laid bare my pain, seeking some acknowledgement of the wreckage, her responses were cold, calculated. The finality in her voice, the way she spoke of her new life without a hint of regret, it was a clear message. I was a chapter firmly closed. The aftermath was brutal. My attempts at reaching out, at salvaging what dignity I had left, were met with legal threats, her words slicing through any hope of reconciliation. It was a wake-up call, a bitter realization that the battleground I was on was one where I stood utterly alone. Then came the wedding of a mutual friend, an event that should have been a celebration but instead felt like walking into the lion's den. There they were, the perfect couple, while whispers of my downfall circulated like fine wine. My presence was a reminder of a scandal, my every move watched, analyzed, and judged. It was in that moment, surrounded by faces I once considered friends, that I truly understood the depth of my isolation. In the months that followed, I tried to move on, to find solace in new beginnings. But each attempt was a glaring reminder of the past, my unresolved feelings acting as a barrier I couldn't breach. The shadow of public outbursts and whispered accusations followed me, a stigma I couldn't shake. The final nail in the coffin was a letter from her, an impersonal epitaph to what we once had. Her words were sharp, a clinical dissection of our relationship, each sentence reinforcing her decision as one made in pursuit of her happiness. It was a cold, calculated goodbye, one that left no room for doubt or hope. I was left reeling, a ship adrift in a sea of my own making. The realization that I had lost not just the woman I loved, but everything that defined me was crushing. My dignity, my friends, even my sense of purpose, all casualties of a war I'd waged on myself. Professionally, I was a ghost, my once promising career a casualty of my inability to separate personal turmoil from my work. The day I lost my job was just another chapter in the tragic saga I'd authored, a tangible reminder of how far I'd fallen. Sitting amidst the ruins of what my life had become, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me here. It was a stark landscape, one where every choice, every action had contributed to my undoing. The pursuit of closure, of understanding, had cost me everything, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of a life I scarcely recognize. In the aftermath of heartbreak and betrayal, I found myself adrift in a sea of confusion and sorrow. The life I knew, the love I cherished, was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. It was during these darkest hours that I stumbled upon an online forum, a haven for souls shattered by deceit. Reading through the stories of others, I felt a kinship in our shared pain, a flicker of hope in the solidarity of our experiences. Compelled by this newfound community, I took the brave step of seeking therapy. Sitting in that small, dimly lit room, I poured out my heart to a stranger. It was a daunting task, unraveling the layers of trust, betrayal, and the raw wounds of my public breakdown. Yet, with each session, I felt a weight lifting, a clarity emerging from the fog of my despair. It was during this period of self-reflection and healing that fate threw a curveball my way, a chance encounter with a woman who sparked something in me I thought was lost forever. Her laughter, her empathy, it offered a glimpse of what could be. But the specter of my past loomed large, the scars of betrayal too fresh, sabotaging what little hope we might have had for something more. The realization that I needed a fresh start was sudden but undeniable. I decided to move to a new city, to leave behind the ghosts of my past relationship and the failures that haunted me. Packing up my life was a bittersweet journey through memory lane, each photo, each memento a reminder of better times, tinged with regret and what-ifs. Arriving in my new city, I was met with the harsh reality that escaping my past was not as simple as changing my address. Despite the physical distance, the reach of social media and the whispers of mutual connections ensured that my reputation had followed me. The shadow of my former life cast a long, dark silhouette over my attempts to start anew. The offer of a new job provided a much-needed distraction, a chance to rebuild my professional life and, perhaps, my sense of self. Yet, connecting with my new colleagues proved challenging. The fear of repeating past mistakes, of opening up only to be hurt again, kept me at arm's length, trapped in a self-imposed exile. In search of an outlet, a way to process my journey and perhaps help others navigating their own paths through heartbreak, I started a blog. Writing anonymously, I shared my story, my mistakes, my lessons learned. The act of putting words to my pain, to my growth, became a therapeutic endeavor, a way to make sense of the chaos that had once threatened to consume me. Now, as I stand looking out over the skyline of my new city, I'm struck by the duality of my circumstances. Yes, I've managed to put physical distance between myself and the reminders of my past, but the emotional scars remain, a testament to the cost of love and betrayal. It's a sobering realization, one that comes with its own form of peace. For in acknowledging the scars, in accepting the pain and the lessons it has taught me, I find myself ready to face whatever comes next, armed with a deeper understanding of myself and a cautious hope for the future. The journey has been long, fraught with setbacks and moments of despair, but also marked by growth and unexpected moments of grace. As the sun sets on this chapter of my life, I'm reminded that while the past may shape us, it does not define us. The true measure of our strength lies in our ability to rise from the ashes of our darkest days, to forge ahead with resilience, and to open our hearts once more, despite knowing the risks. This is the true cost of love and betrayal, but also the undeniable value of hope. And when I got home, I heard unfamiliar voices coming from the basement. I listened carefully and heard my husband talking to a woman. "Hey, can we be together until late tonight?" "Yeah. My wife is out until tonight, so relax. Let's enjoy our time together slowly." My husband was talking in a mushy voice. He was cheating on me, without my knowing. Blood rushed to my head, and I wanted to rush in right away, but I calmed down. Even if I went now, I would only catch them in the act. I planned to make them taste hell. My name is Kate Miller. I'm currently 40 and working as an office clerk for a stationery manufacturer. I married my husband, Keith, 5 years ago, but we promised to live together as a childless couple due to our age. Since then, we've been living together happily, but lately, we've stopped seeing each other as members of the opposite sex. Before, I used to be embarrassed to show my face without makeup in front of Keith, but as the years went by, I became able to walk around without any shame. Keith, like me, got used to it, and although he used to exercise if he gained even a little weight because he didn't want to be thought of as sloppy, he eventually stopped caring about his appearance. Now, he has a beer belly and fat resting above his belt. "You've gained weight recently. Shouldn't you exercise for your health?" "Huh? Oh, yeah. I will sometime." Keith was lying on the sofa, engrossed in his cell phone. He often gave me half-hearted answers when I spoke to him. Were we both going to forget about caring for each other and grow old in this degenerate life? I wondered. Then one day, Keith suddenly became interested in fashion. On his day off, he bought a bunch of clothes and put on a fashion show in front of the mirror. He was in a good mood, even humming a tune. I thought it was strange to see Keith so happy. I was suspicious of him suddenly becoming interested in fashion, so I asked. "You used to say cheap clothes were enough. What's changed?" Noticing me, Keith answered while folding the clothes he had spread out. "Oh, I just thought I should take care of my appearance now that I'm getting older." With that, Keith took his clothes to his room. I was strangely happy that Keith had become fashionable. It reminded me of how cool Keith was before we got married. I thought I'd follow Keith's lead and buy some nice makeup to make him fall in love with me again. It felt like we were back in our newlywed days, and I made dinner a little more luxurious. Keith also seemed happy when he saw my appearance and the food, and he asked, "What's today? Is it some kind of anniversary?" "No. You became fashionable, and it reminded me of our early days, so I got a little carried away," I said, blushing, and Keith smiled happily. "Oh, is that it? I'm happy to have such a lavish dinner for the first time in a while. Let's eat." Keith ate heartily and finished everything. I was glad I had made the effort to cook, watching him eat. The next day, a colleague called out to me at work. "Mrs. Miller, I saw your husband outside yesterday, and he seemed to be having a great time walking around." Mrs. Young, my coworker, nudged my arm and said with a grin, "Did you see? He woke up to fashion recently, and he bought a ton of clothes yesterday, so I was surprised," I said, and Mrs. Young's eyes widened. "Eh? Didn't you go shopping with him?" "No, I was home yesterday." I denied it, and I felt something was off. Mrs. Young then told me what she remembered seeing yesterday. "I'm sure I saw someone yesterday at noon who looked just like Mrs. Yu, with the same height and build, and similar hairstyle and clothes, next to your husband. But I only saw them inside a store, so it might have been a store clerk." Mrs. Young said that, thinking it was a misunderstanding on her part. I was a bit flustered, but I thought it was definitely a store clerk. Keith wouldn't do something like that, I thought. It must have been a store clerk. Don't scare me like that first thing in the morning. You woke me up all at once. I brushed off Mrs. Young's misunderstanding by laughing it off. I was chatting with Mrs. Young until work started when I got an email. It was about the possibility of participating in next month's company trip. I marked my participation and promised to go with Mrs. Young. Then it became evening as I was working, and I went home after stopping by the supermarket. When I entered the room, Keith was in the kitchen, rustling around. Since he never cooks even when he comes home earlier than me, I was suspicious. "I'm home. What are you doing?" When I called out, Keith was a little surprised, but soon moved away from the kitchen. "Oh, welcome back. I was just thirsty, so I was looking for some tea," Keith explained, but he was searching in a spice rack where there should have been neither a cup nor tea. "That's the spice rack. You know that the tea is in the fridge, don't you?" I said, as I took out the tea and handed it to Keith. I was astonished at Keith, who didn't even know where the tea was. Keith took it with a laugh as if it were someone else's business and slouched around in the living room. I cooked dinner for Keith like that, and while eating together, I talked about what happened at the company today. Speaking of which, I'm going on a company trip next month. I'll also finish shopping for the trip with my colleague Mrs. Young next Saturday. "Oh, got it. Have fun." Then, I remembered the story that Mrs. Young saw Keith. "Oh. Speaking of which, Mrs. Young saw you yesterday. She thought we were on a date because someone who looked like me was next to you. She saw you in a clothing store, but you were the salesperson, right?" I said, looking cautiously at Keith. Keith also nodded and spoke. "Yeah. I had the salesperson put together a coordination that suited me. I requested clothes that wouldn't look strange next to you since the salesperson looked just like you." I was delighted by Keith's words, thinking of me. Since I thought we were going to live together like family, with no more dates, I got excited about being able to date, holding hands like when we were newlyweds. I completely forgot my uneasy feelings about Keith and finished eating happily. And for a few weeks, I spent peaceful days until it became Friday night. I'll go shopping for the trip with Mrs. Young tomorrow. I'll probably eat dinner too, so I might not get back until after 11 p.m. When I told Keith that I was going out tomorrow, he closed his phone and asked, "Got it. Have fun. Where are you gonna be, by the way?" I think I'll be at the big department store 3 stations away." "All right. Don't worry about the time, just enjoy yourself. If it gets late, I'll come and pick you up." Keith was worried about me coming back. Recently, Keith has been worryingly kind and caring, and I thanked him with a not entirely displeased tone. Saturday morning came, and I went out early. I wanted to buy my summer clothes before meeting Mrs. Young. I spent a lot of time trying on clothes, and I didn't want to bother Mrs. Young, so I went early to choose and buy them alone. I ended up with more bags than planned, and I still had 2 hours left before Mrs. Young would arrive. I looked for a locker to leave my bags in, but there were no vacancies. I had plenty of time, so I thought I'd go home and drop it off. As I was walking down the street near my home, I saw a woman wearing a dress from my favorite brand. It was the very dress I had been wondering whether to buy. Her hairstyle and figure were similar to mine, and as I was watching, thinking I might buy it, the woman stopped right in front of my house. At that moment, I hid behind a utility pole to watch without being seen. As expected, Keith opened the front door and, after looking around, beckoned the woman into the house. Suspicion growing, I decided not to enter through the front door and quietly entered through the kitchen's back door. Then I heard the voices of Keith and the woman from the living room. "Can we be together until tonight?" "Yeah. My wife is going out to have dinner with her friends, so we can spend time together until around 10 p.m. Keith reassured the woman, saying that I wouldn't be there until night. "I'm so happy. Last time you left just after shopping, and I was lonely." Sorry, that day my wife was at home, and I would have looked suspicious if I'd been out late." I could hear Keith's voice, responding sweetly to the woman's cutesy tone. I felt a chill in that moment. I realized that the person Mrs. Young saw last time wasn't a store clerk, but this mistress. The thought that Keith had been taking such care with his appearance for this woman made me angry. "Hey, Did you look for the spices? If you didn't, I can't make a delicious meal, you know? I looked for them last time. I'll show you while I still remember. With that, their voices grew closer and closer. I was supposed to leave the clothes and leave, but I feared being discovered and instead went out with the bags. I managed to leave the house just in time, without making a sound. I put the bags in the outdoor shed and left the house in frustration, feeling like crying. As I walked, I wondered how long Keith had been cheating. Thinking that all the efforts Keith had made for me recently were actually for that woman made me furious. Feeling irritated, I met up with Mrs. Young. Even while shopping, I couldn't help but wonder when the two of them had started cheating and who the mistress was. Determined to make him confess, I came up with a plan. After dinner with Mrs. Young, I returned home around 10 p.m. He was lounging around the house as if nothing had happened. Welcome back. Did you have fun? Keith was behaving so naturally that I thought what I had seen at noon might have been a dream. Yes, I had a wonderful time. I responded to his lie with a lie of my own. I wouldn't be satisfied unless I trapped him in a way that he couldn't talk his way out of. I thought so and kept Keith in the dark until my plan was perfect. Of course, during that time, I diligently collected evidence like photographs and recorded phone calls. 3 weeks went by and I was looking forward to the company trip this weekend. By the way, isn't the company trip coming up soon? When does it start and end? Keith asked with a worried look in his eyes, but I knew he was probably planning to bring that woman over. I answered with a look of concern. It's from Friday morning until Sunday night. Keith, can you manage to cook and all? You might want to order takeout. Yeah. I'll try not to make a mess. I'll miss you, but enjoy your time with your colleagues. I'm sure that at that moment, Keith was secretly celebrating the opportunity to spend time with his mistress. I hoped he would keep playing into my hands without suspecting anything. And then Friday came and it was the day of the company trip. I was planning to leave the house at 10 a.m. and Keith was leaving for work at 8 a.m., so I would leave later. I took advantage of that time to carry out my plan. After Keith left, I immediately opened his room. I intentionally spilled perfume, filling the room with the scent. Then, I quickly sent Keith an email, telling him that I'd accidentally spilled perfume while cleaning his room and asking him to sleep in the basement from today until Sunday. Keith's room had an inside lock, but the basement had an outside lock. I had utilized the mechanism of the locks. Since I received a reply from Keith agreeing to use the basement, everything seemed to be going according to plan. I looked at Keith's email and then headed straight for the company trip. During the trip, I couldn't relax. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Keith and his mistress, and I found it hard to enjoy myself. Hey, Mrs. Miller. You look pale and you're sweating a lot. I'll tell the boss, why don't you take a break? Mrs. Young, who had been walking with me, looked quite concerned about my condition. I'm sorry, even though I promised to walk with you. I feel sick, so I'm going to leave early. Don't worry about it. The boss was walking over there, so I'll go get him. Mrs. Young ran to the boss and called him over. When the boss saw my condition, he was very concerned and asked if I was feeling unwell. Go back to the hotel or have your husband come and pick you up. He told me. If Keith came to pick me up, our planned scheme would fail, so I decided to return to the hotel and leave early in the morning. Keith would never think I'd come back on Saturday morning when I said I'd return on Sunday night. I was so excited to imagine Keith's panic-stricken look. When morning came, I apologized to Mrs. Young and my boss and decided to head home early. I took connecting trains and arrived at my nearest station at 9 in the morning. Hoping that Keith and his mistress were still fast asleep, I hurried home. The moment I opened the key to my house, I was sweating so much that it didn't feel like I was opening my own door. With a tension that made me feel like I couldn't make a sound, my heartbeat kept rising. Just when I was going to go to the basement and quietly lock the door, I heard a voice. Keith, wake up. It's already 9 in the morning. I'm hungry, let's eat breakfast. The mistress had woken up. I was so surprised at the voice that I slipped the luggage I was holding and made a loud noise. I was sweating and panicking, but I decided to change my plan instantly. I'm home. I loudly announced my arrival to Keith. The two were silent and still. They probably didn't expect me to come back, and they must be panicking. After that, I continued to walk around the living room, making loud noises and putting away the luggage from the trip. The two were probably stuck in a situation where they couldn't get out. Then I said loudly, "Huh? Is Keith out?" I pretended to look for Keith. "Oh. He might be sleeping in the basement." I said it loudly and slowly approached the basement. I heard a small noise from the basement as if they were desperately looking for a hiding place, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Then I flung the basement door open. "Huh? He's not here. Maybe he went out," I said and sharply closed the basement door. At the same time, I casually locked it. The two probably haven't realized the seriousness of being locked in, feeling relieved that they've managed to hide safely. I turned on the TV and listened with the volume up a bit. The weather forecaster reported that today was going to be a hot and humid summer day. I turned on the air conditioner in the living room and enjoyed myself in the cool room. On the other hand, the basement was almost like a storeroom, with no air conditioner or fan. I smiled smugly, wondering how long they could endure. An hour passed. Keith and the woman were still holding on, waiting for me to go somewhere. I looked out the window. The sun was shining, and it was a scorching heat. I vowed not to go outside, so as not to give Keith a chance. As I comfortably watched TV and ate snacks, another hour passed. Then, as if they had reached their limit, I heard Keith's voice. "Hey! Open up." I sighed and headed to the basement. When I opened the key, a stuffy air flowed from the basement. "It's hot, give me water." Keith went to the living room, sweating and looking exhausted. I peeked into the basement, but the woman was not there, apparently still hiding. Keith drained the water and started yelling at me. "You said I could use the basement. Why did you lock it?" Keith showered me with curses. I apologized sincerely, but said a little word to shake Keith. "I'm sorry. But when I checked the room, nobody was there." "Where were you, Keith?" Keith couldn't possibly admit that he was hiding in a closet with a woman, so he blabbered on, raising his voice to cover it up. "So, what does it matter? Ah, it's hot, it's hot." With that, Keith took a bottle of water in hand and went back down to the basement. I figured he must have gone to give the water to the woman hiding there. 5 minutes later, Keith still hadn't returned and commanded me as follows. "I feel like I'm gonna faint from the heat. Go buy some ice cream right now." Keith spoke to me condescendingly, pointing his finger. "There's ice cream in the fridge, you know." I saw right through Keith's naive strategy. I had anticipated what Keith was likely to say, and I was prepared. "Today, let's have pancakes." "Yes, pancakes." "You don't have the ingredients, do you?" "Go to the supermarket and buy them right now." "Oh, coincidentally, I was planning to make pancakes today. I have all the ingredients, so there's no need to go shopping today." Keith was trying in some way to get me out of the house. I was desperate not to laugh at Keith as he thought frantically. I finally decided to take drastic action, fearing that if he said anything more, it would be something I hadn't anticipated. "The smell of perfume must have already disappeared from your room, and you don't need to use the basement. Shall we clean the basement?" As I tried to go to the basement, Keith stopped me in a panic. "I'll clean it, so it's okay." "You've never cleaned anything before, have you?" Even though I said that, Keith was desperate to stop me. "I feel like cleaning." "Leave it to me." He forcibly took the cleaning tools, so I stared at him and said, "Then clean your own room instead of the basement." You've never even cleaned your own room before. Start with that, not the basement. Keith was momentarily taken aback by the irrefutable words. I took advantage of the opportunity, hurriedly went down to the basement, and opened the door. The woman was sitting in the middle of the basement room, perhaps because the closet was too hot. The moment our eyes met, her face turned pale. Who are you? Of course, I knew she was his mistress, but I pretended not to know. Keith and the woman thought it was their chance, so they lied. This lady is my boss at work. I forgot to bring home some important documents, and she brought them to me. Yes, that's right. I'm Keith's boss. I'm here to help. Keith thought he had cleverly lied his way out of the situation. The woman also clumsily tried to stick to the lie, desperate to maintain the story. It was too sloppy, and I almost laughed. Really? Your boss comes to deliver them on a weekend morning? Normally, wouldn't you go and pick them up? I said that, and Keith started to sweat. Furthermore, I confronted Keith. Besides, if she's just delivering something, she doesn't have to come into the room, right? Even if you wanted to offer her a tea as thanks, you'd lead her to the living room, wouldn't you? It's strange to bring your boss into a room without air conditioning. Keith seemed to regret the lie he had made on the spot. But it's too late to regret now. The woman also just turned blue and hung her head. Since Keith and the woman were just silent, I brought up the subject. You're not his boss, are you? You're his lover, right? When I said that, Keith's shoulders twitched. It was as if he was admitting it. I'm sorry I lied. But really, this is the first time I've done something like this. Please believe me in that. Keith tried to explain. The woman also nodded, in agreement, with Keith. I'm not going to fall for such a makeshift excuse. So, the woman who was visiting our house last time was someone else? I said, and Keith let out a loud exclamation in alarm. Did you think you could fool me? I've got evidence of you bringing her here again and again, and all those phone calls. I've got proof. With that, I handed Keith the business card of the divorce lawyer I had gotten. The woman looked pale throughout the ordeal. Keith was very persistent, and I couldn't refuse him. What? You were the one coming on to me, saying you're better than my wife. What are you playing the victim for? When Keith shouted angrily, the woman fought back. I am the victim. Telling me to dress and style my hair like your wife, so your wife and neighbors wouldn't find out. You're so selfish. The woman was also yelling, emotions raw. I stopped their quarreling with a single sentence. The real victim here is me. With that, their argument came to an abrupt halt. I quickly got the woman's address and contact information, and sent her home for the day. She played the victim card right to the end. Once alone with me, Keith looked awkward and kept his eyes down. Can you please leave right away? I think the lawyer will be contacting you about the division of assets. After that, Keith left with only his essentials. He's probably going to his parents' house. I had expected this, so the moment Keith left, I called his parents. Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to call so suddenly. Can I talk to you for a bit? I told his parents that Keith's infidelity had caused us to divorce, and they were quite angry. They apologized to me and promised to kick him out even if he came back home. Keith moved exactly as I had predicted. He apparently tried to lie and stay with his parents. I'm home. We're doing some renovations at the house. Kate went to stay at her parents', so let me stay here too. He shamelessly tried to stay with this lie, but his parents, having heard everything from me, lectured Keith and kicked him out. Keith will be staying in a hotel for a while, and I'm sure his money will run out soon. As I imagined Keith feeling uncomfortable as his address changes and rumors spread after the divorce, I found it funny and couldn't help laughing. I was delighted thinking about Keith's future miserable life. And the woman he cheated with will also be served with a claim for damages for emotional distress, so a few days later, the woman came to my house. her parents were standing behind her. They said that she wasn't working and couldn't pay the claim, so she had turned to her parents. And her parents, feeling terribly sorry, wanted to apologize in person. The sight of the three of them apologizing at my front door was quite ridiculous. I told the cheating woman this. You can take years if you need to, but you must pay back the money you earn yourself. Don't rely on your parents at all. With that, the woman, who seemed intent on relying on her parents, looked fearful, almost crying. No matter how much she resisted, I couldn't sympathize with her. I thought it served her right. After a while, I received payment from Keith and the woman. I sold the house we were living in and moved to an apartment for one person. I'd never lived alone before, so I was anxious, but it turned out to be comfortable. I didn't want to give up on love because of what happened, so I'm going to start looking for a new relationship. I'm still anxious about falling in love again, but I think I can forget about my ex-husband entirely by finding new love. I've decided to live a life without. Hey there, I'm Mark. Life's got this funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. You think you've got it all figured out, and then bam. That's where my story starts, with a discovery in the least likely of places, my wife's car. It was a Tuesday, I needed to grab some groceries, and Claire, that's my wife, her car was blocking mine. So, I figured, why not just use hers? It's funny how the smallest decisions can lead to the biggest changes. I'm driving along, humming to some old tune on the radio, when I realized I forgot the shopping list. Trust me to forget my head if it wasn't screwed on, right? I pulled over, rummaging through the glove compartment for a pen and paper. And that's when I found it, an unopened condom packet, tucked away beneath a pile of old receipts and gum wrappers. Now, Claire and we've been married for a good 7 years. We've had our ups and downs, like any couple, but we stopped using those things after we decided to try for a kid. That was years ago, so you can imagine the cold knot that started forming in my stomach. For a moment, I just sat there, turning the packet over in my hands. It was one of those fancy brands, not the kind you'd expect to find forgotten in a car. The expiration date was next year. Fresh, new. I remember the ride home. It felt longer than usual, every traffic light mocking me with its red glare, every second stretching out like an accusation. My mind was racing with a million thoughts, but one kept pushing its way to the forefront. Was Claire cheating on me? When I got home, I did the whole normal routine. Asked her how her day was, listened to her talk about work and the new fitness class she joined. She seemed so normal, so, Claire, it was surreal. I wanted to blurt out my discovery, confront her right there, but something held me back. Fear, maybe, or maybe I just didn't want to face the possibility that my life wasn't what I thought it was. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Claire was asleep next to me, her breathing steady and peaceful. I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. My mind kept replaying our past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Late nights at work, those new friends she'd made at the gym, her phone buzzing at odd hours. Sleep didn't come easy that night. And when it did, it was filled with dreams of shadows and whispers, a maze of doubts and half-seen faces. I woke up feeling like I'd run a marathon, every part of me heavy with a sense of impending doom. The next few days were a blur of observation and paranoia. I noticed how she'd started taking her phone everywhere with her, even to the bathroom. How she'd quickly change the screen if I walked by. I tried to shake the feeling off, told myself I was being ridiculous. But you know what they say about gut feelings. They're rarely wrong, and mine was screaming at me that something was off. I just didn't know what to do with that information. Confronting her seemed like stepping off a cliff. Ignorance, as they say, is bliss. But is it really, when every look, every touch, feels tainted with doubt? That's where my journey began, in a haze of confusion and mistrust. Little did I know, it was only going to get more complicated from there. So there I was, playing the world's worst detective in the most messed up episode of my life. I started watching Claire like a hawk, you know? Looking for anything. Any little thing that might scream, "Hey Mark, your wife's stepping out on you." Every day became this bizarre game of observation. I'd notice the smallest changes: a new perfume scent clinging to her when she came home, her coming back from work later than usual, phone calls where she'd quickly leave the room. None of it was a smoking gun, but boy, did it add fuel to the fire raging in my mind. I tried to act normal, but inside, I was a mess. My thoughts were constantly circling back to that damn condom packet. Sometimes, I'd catch myself just staring at Claire, trying to read her, figure out what was going on behind those eyes I thought I knew so well. Then, one evening, something happened. It was garbage day, so I was hauling out the trash, and I found this crumpled receipt from a restaurant tucked into the kitchen bin. It was for 2 dinners, 2 glasses of wine. Claire had told me she was working late that night. I remember feeling this jolt of shock, mixed with an odd sense of vindication. It was like, aha, gotcha. I confronted her about it. Tried to keep my voice steady, but it probably came out all accusing like. "Hey, found this receipt. You didn't mention going out for dinner the other night." Her reaction? Annoyance. Pure and simple, she rolled her eyes, told me it was a lunch meeting with a client, that they'd taken the receipt for expenses but must have accidentally given her a copy. She made it sound so mundane, so plausible. I wanted to believe her. God. I wanted to just laugh it off, call myself a paranoid idiot and move on. But something in the pit of my stomach just wouldn't let me. It's like when you start suspecting something, everything becomes a clue, a piece of the puzzle. After that, things between us got tense. I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much she'd changed recently. There were all these little things. Like, she'd started working out more, which was great, but she'd never been much into fitness before. Her wardrobe had changed too, nothing drastic, but she was definitely dressing sharper, more. I don't know, attractively? And her phone, that damn phone, was always with her, always buzzing with new messages. I remember one night, lying in bed next to her, watching the soft glow of her phone screen lighting up her face. She thought I was asleep, but I was just lying there, wondering who was on the other end of those messages. And then there were the late nights. She'd always been a bit of a workaholic, but it was getting ridiculous. Always some project, some deadline that kept her at the office till all hours. I started to wonder, were they really all work-related? I felt like I was going crazy, second-guessing everything, doubting the woman I'd shared my life with for almost a decade. But I couldn't let it go. It was like this nagging voice in the back of my head, constantly whispering that something wasn't right. So, I did what any sane person would do, note the sarcasm here. I started snooping more. I'd check her browser history when she was in the shower, try to glance at her phone screen over her shoulder. I hated myself for it, felt like some creepy stalker instead of her husband. But I just had to know. One day, while she was out running errands, I even went through her closet and drawers. I told myself I was looking for more receipts, any physical proof. But deep down, I think I was just trying to find a connection to the woman I felt I was losing. Everything I found was so painfully normal. Clothes, shoes, old books, bits of jewelry. No secret love letters, no hidden burner phone. Just the everyday stuff of the woman I loved, and possibly the woman who was betraying me. It's funny, in a twisted way. You think you know someone, think you built this life together, and then one day, you're sifting through their belongings, looking for evidence that they're lying to you. It's a special kind of hell, let me tell you. But despite all my snooping, all my paranoia, I didn't find anything concrete. Just a bunch of maybes and what-ifs. I was stuck in this limbo, torn between wanting to confront her with my suspicions and fearing what that confrontation would bring. In the end, I didn't have to make that decision. Because that's when things took a turn for the bizarre. That's when I found something that changed everything. Okay, so here's where things start getting a little, let's say, film noir. I started tailing Claire. Yeah, I know how it sounds. Creepy, obsessive, choose your adjective. But the thing is, the suspicion was eating me alive. I had to know the truth, even if it meant crossing lines I never thought I'd even approach. One afternoon, I decided to follow her. She said she was meeting a friend for coffee. Something about the way she said it, that slight hesitation, set off alarm bells in my head. So, I got into my car and trailed her from a distance. She went to this quaint little cafe downtown, the kind with cozy boobs and a constant hum of conversation. I sat in my car across the street, feeling like a complete stalker. I watched her walk in, and a few minutes later, this guy joined her. Tall, well-dressed, with a confidence in his stride that made my stomach churn. They sat in a booth by the window, laughing and talking. From where I sat, I could see their expressions, the easy way they leaned into each other's space. It was intimate, too intimate. My hand was gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I remember thinking, this is it, Mark. This is what you were afraid of. But a part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for all of this. Maybe he was just an old friend, maybe. I drove home before they left the cafe, couldn't stomach watching any longer. Back home, I was a bundle of nerves. Claire came back later, humming some tune, acting like everything was normal. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to confront her right then and there. Instead, I waited for my chance to snoop on her phone. Yeah, I know, invasion of privacy and all that. But I was desperate, so, when she went to take a shower, I grabbed her phone from the bedside table. I felt like a criminal as I quickly scanned through her messages, her call history. But there was nothing, no incriminating texts, no mysterious calls. It was also frustratingly normal. Friends, family, work stuff. I even checked her photos, but all I found were selfies, pictures of our dog, random shots of our last vacation. I sat there, her phone in my hand, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. Was I just being paranoid? Was my imagination running wild, conjuring up affairs and betrayals where there were none? I mean, what was I expecting to find? Some explicit texts, a secret second life? I put her phone back, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. Claire came back from her shower, all smiles and casual chatter. I just nodded along, my mind miles away. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I felt like I was next to a stranger. It's a strange feeling, lying beside someone you've shared your life with, wondering if you ever really knew them at all. Every laugh, every touch, was it all just a lie? Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on Claire, looking for anything out of the ordinary. But everything seemed to go back to normal. Work, gym, the occasional outing with friends. If she was having an affair, she was damn good at covering her tracks. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was just seeing things that weren't there. But then, there were these little moments, these tiny slip-ups that kept the embers of my suspicion alive. Like the way she'd quickly end phone calls when I walked into the room, or how she'd become more protective of her phone, always making sure it was within her reach. I even tried casually asking about her day, her friends, trying to gauge her reactions. But Claire was a closed book. She'd answer my questions with a smile, never giving away anything more than surface details. I was stuck in this limbo of doubt and uncertainty. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to chalk it up to a rough patch in our marriage and move on. But another part, a louder part, kept pushing me to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, I continued my little game of cat and mouse, watching, waiting, hoping for something, anything, that would either confirm my fears or put them to rest. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to realize something: living in a constant state of suspicion was no way to live at all. I needed answers, one way or another. And little did I know, those answers were closer than I thought. 2 days after the cafe incident, I hit a breaking point. You know that feeling when something's eating you up inside, and you just gotta let it out, consequences be damned? That was me, standing in our kitchen, watching Claire cook dinner, pretending like everything was just peachy. Finally, I blurted out, "Claire, we need to talk." "Who's the guy you were with at the cafe?" Her reaction? A mix of surprise and this sort of frustrated annoyance. She turned off the stove, faced me with her arms crossed, and said, "He's just a friend, Mark. You're acting crazy." And that's how our big blow-up started. Our kitchen, which had seen many a peaceful meal, suddenly turned into a battlefield. She denied everything, said I was being paranoid, that there was nothing going on. She kept asking me to trust her, but trust is a fragile thing. Once it starts cracking, good luck trying to patch it up. I wanted to believe her. Every fiber of my being was screaming for me to just accept her explanation and move on. But there was this nagging voice in my head, a persistent little whisper that kept saying, "What if?" The argument escalated. I asked about the changes in her behavior, the late nights, the secrecy with her phone. She had an answer for everything. Work stress, needing some personal space, a desire to feel good about herself. It all sounded reasonable, but there was a part of me that just couldn't buy it completely. We went round and round, our voices getting louder, our words more cutting. It's funny, in a sad way, how quickly love can turn to anger when fear and doubt are thrown into the mix. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were opponents in an emotional tug of war, each trying to pull the other into our own version of reality. I accused her of lying, of cheating. She accused me of not trusting her, of being obsessed. The words stung. They hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. I saw tears in her eyes, and damn it, my heart ached. I hated that we were doing this, that I'd let my suspicions drag us down this dark path. But once you open Pandora's box, you can't just shove everything back in and close the lid. The doubts, the fears, the hurt, they were all out in the open now, swirling around us like some malevolent storm. Eventually, the storm passed, as they tend to do. We were left standing in the ruins of our once peaceful evening, emotionally exhausted, each lost in our own turmoil. Claire wiped her eyes, muttered something about needing some air, and left the house. I just stood there, in the silence of our kitchen, feeling like the biggest jerk on the planet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying the argument in my head, analyzing every word, every expression. Part of me was scared that I'd pushed her too far, that this might be the beginning of the end for us. Another part was still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong about everything. The next day, Claire was distant. We moved around each other like two strangers, polite but cautious. The air was thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. I wanted to reach out, to try and fix things, but I didn't know how. It felt like we were standing on either side of a chasm, with no bridge in sight. As the days passed, the tension between us grew. We were stuck in this weird limbo, neither of us knowing how to move forward. It was like we were both waiting for something to happen, something that would either mend the cracks in our relationship or break it apart completely. And then, something did happen. Something that changed the game entirely. That night, when everything changed, started off like any other in our new, tension-filled normal. Claire said she was going out to clear her head, get some space. I was left alone, sitting in a living room that suddenly felt too big, too empty. I was mindlessly flipping through channels when her phone, left on the coffee table, buzzed to life. Instinctively, I reached for it. Caller ID was just a number, no name. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered it. "Hello?" "Claire's phone," I said, trying to sound casual. The voice on the other end was male, confident, a little too smooth for my liking. "Hey, it's me, can I talk to Claire?" I felt my heart rate spike. It was him, the guy from the cafe. My mind raced. I needed to play this cool. "Sorry, she's not here right now. Can I take a message?" I tried to keep my voice steady, disguising it slightly. There was a pause, then a cautious, "No, that's okay. "I'll call back later," and he hung up, just like that, but that brief exchange was enough. It was him, the guy the first saw with Claire. I sat there, her phone in my hand, my mind reeling. This was it, the proof I'd been so desperately searching for, and yet, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Claire came home later, finding me in the same spot, her phone still in my hand. I saw the moment she realized I'd answered it. Her face went white, her eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. "We need to talk, Claire," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. She just nodded, taking a seat across from me. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that felt almost tangible. I told her about the call, about the guy asking for her. I watched her closely, looking for any sign, any tell that would give her away. And then, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face, her body shaking with sobs. "It's true, Mark, I've been having an affair. I'm so sorry." The words hit me like a tidal wave, even though I'd suspected, hearing her say it out loud was a whole different kind of pain. It was real now, undeniable. I felt a range of emotions crashing over me. Anger, hurt, betrayal. But more than anything, I felt lost. This was Claire, the woman I'd shared my life with, my dreams, my bed. And she'd been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. Why, Claire, why him, why this? The questions poured out of me, each one like a blow to the chest. She tried to explain, through her tears, about feeling neglected, about needing something more. She talked about how we'd drifted apart, how she'd felt lonely and unappreciated. It was like listening to a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. I listened, but it was hard to hear past the roar of betrayal in my ears. She said it was a mistake, that she regretted it, that she wanted to work things out. But the trust was shattered, broken into a million pieces. We talked, or rather, she talked and I listened, for what felt like hours. But the more she said, the more distant I felt. It was like standing on the shore, watching our marriage, our life together, drift away into a sea of lies and deceit. That night, I slept on the couch. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling a profound sense of emptiness. I was at a crossroads, torn between the life I thought I had and the reality that was crashing down around me. The next few days were a blur. We were like two ghosts, haunting the same house, barely speaking, barely acknowledging each other. I was trapped in a cycle of anger and sadness, not sure how to break free. I thought about leaving, just packing my bags and walking away. But it wasn't that simple. There was our history, our shared memories, the love that, despite everything, still lingered somewhere in the depths of my heart. But could I ever trust her again? Could we ever go back to how things were? The answer seemed to be a resounding no, echoing in the silence between us. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, life threw another curveball my way. The days that followed Claire's confession felt like walking through a surreal, feverish nightmare. Words like divorce and separation, once unthinkable, became part of our daily vocabulary. We were two people caught in a whirlwind of hurt, anger, and disappointment, trying to make sense of a life that had suddenly turned upside down. Negotiations about who'd get what were petty and painful. We'd sit across the table, discussing assets and memories like they were just items on a checklist. Our home, once filled with laughter and love, had become a battleground of bitterness and regret. Claire lost a lot in the fallout. Her marriage, for starters. Then there was her reputation. Once word got out about the affair, friends began to choose sides. It was ugly and spiteful, the kind of drama you'd expect from a bad TV show, not real life. And the guy, her lover from the cafe? Turned out he was married, with kids. A whole other life Claire either didn't know about or chose to ignore. When his wife found out, that little fling crumbled like a house of cards. He wasn't about to leave his family, and Claire was left with nothing but broken promises and a shattered heart. As for me, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I hardly recognized anymore. I moved out, found a small apartment that felt more like a temporary shelter than a home. The walls were bare, the rooms echoed with the kind of silence that only comes from loss. In the quiet of my new place, I'd often find myself sifting through memories, trying to figure out where things went wrong. Was there a moment, a sign I missed? Could I have done something different, been a better husband, a better friend? I knew deep down that these were pointless questions. What happened, happened. Claire made her choices, and now we were both living with the consequences. But knowing that didn't make the nights any less lonely or the mornings any less daunting. I had been right about my suspicions, but the victory was hollow. There was no satisfaction in having uncovered the truth, only a profound sense of loss. I had lost my wife, my partner, my best friend. In trying to hold on to the truth, I had let go of a part of myself. The divorce was finalized with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency. We signed papers in a sterile office, our once vibrant relationship reduced to a few signatures and legal terms. Claire and I barely spoke. What was there to say? Goodbye, sorry, none of it seemed enough. Life moved on, as it always does. I immersed myself in work, in hobbies, in anything that could fill the void. Friends tried to be supportive, setting me up on blind dates, inviting me to social gatherings. But I was a ghost among the living, going through the motions without really being present. Claire reached out a few times, emails mostly, expressing remorse, a desire to talk. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. Maybe one day we could find a way to be in each other's lives, but that day was not today. As months turned into a year, I started to feel like I was waking up from a long, troubled sleep. The pain was still there, a dull ache in the background, but it was no longer the all-consuming force it once was. I began to realize that life, for all its unpredictability and heartache, still had a lot to offer. I discovered new passions, rekindled old friendships, and started to appreciate the simple, everyday moments that I had taken for granted. Looking back, I can't say I regret the path my life has taken. Sure, there are things I wish had gone differently, words I wish I could take back, moments I wish I could relive. But every experience, good or bad, shapes us into who we are. I don't know what the future holds, and that's okay. I've learned that it's not the certainty of the path that matters, but the journey itself. And my journey, though marked by scars, is still very much